Halloween has always been my favorite time of year. Some people wait all year for Christmas, others for Thanksgiving. But me, I've always been the guy who waits for October to roll around so I can start unpacking my bins of skeletons, cobwebs, fog machines, and creepy animatronics. To me, Halloween isn't just a holiday, it's an experience. It's about creating a world where kids can feel the thrill of being scared just enough, where neighbors can laugh and bond, and where families can come together for something fun. I grew up in a house where my dad strung up orange lights, crossed the porch, and my mom carved pumpkins for every step leading up to the door. We weren't rich, but they made the holiday magical, and I wanted to pass that same magic along. So when I bought my house, one of my promises to myself was that I'd go all out every Halloween. Every year, my decorations got bigger, scarier, and more elaborate. What started as a few fake tombstones in the yard turned into a full haunted house setup that people from across town started visiting. This year, I had a new vision. I wanted to transform my entire yard into something people would never forget. I built towering graveyard gates out of PVC pipes and spray paint. Installed motion-activated zombies that groaned when kids walked by, and even set up a giant inflatable dragon that breathed fog across the driveway. I poured weeks of planning and late-night labor into it. My garage looked like a prop studio, wires and lights strewn everywhere. But when it all came together, I knew it was my best work yet. Neighbors started noticing before Halloween even arrived. Kids would ride their bikes past my house just to get a peek. And parents stopped me in the driveway to say how excited they were to bring their families on the big night. Even people who didn't have kids told me they loved seeing the decorations. It made the neighborhood feel alive, festive, and fun. And honestly, their reactions kept me going. But there was one group that wasn't impressed. The HOA. Now, let me explain about my homeowners association. They weren't just strict. They were the kind of board that seemed to think running the neighborhood was equivalent to running the country. They had rules for how tall your grass could be, what color curtains you could hang, even where your trash can had to sit on collection day. They never missed a chance to remind you who was in charge, and me. I had been on their radar for a while. It started a couple of years back when they told me my holiday lights were too bright. Then they complained about the number of cars parked on the street when I hosted a Halloween party. I complied when I had to, but I never backed down. I wasn't going to let a group of people who couldn't handle a little fun ruin my traditions. This year, though, I could already sense it was going to be a battle. A week before Halloween, I got a letter taped to my door. The HOA claimed my decorations were excessive, that they posed a danger to community aesthetics, and that my fog machine created a traffic hazard. I actually laughed out loud when I read it. A traffic hazard. Because of a little spooky fog drifting onto the sidewalk. It was ridiculous. Still, they weren't joking. At the bottom of the notice was a warning. If I didn't scale back my decorations immediately, I would face a fine. I crumpled up the letter and tossed it aside. My yard wasn't dangerous. My decorations weren't breaking any real rules. The truth was, the HOA didn't like that my house drew attention. They didn't like seeing groups of neighbors gathered outside, enjoying themselves because it wasn't something they could control. So, I ignored the warning. I kept building, kept decorating, kept adding new touches. And by the time Halloween week arrived, my house looked like... I held that fine notice in my hand and felt my blood boiling. $200 for putting up decorations that everyone else in the neighborhood clearly loved. It wasn't about the money, it was about the principle. They wanted me to bend, to admit that I was wrong, when deep down I knew I hadn't broken a single valid rule. Unauthorized decorations. I asked Peterson. Show me where in the bylaws it says Halloween decorations are banned. He shifted uncomfortably, flipping through a binder he'd brought with him like he was searching for something he knew wasn't there. Finally, he muttered, "It falls under community aesthetic guidelines." Community aesthetic guidelines. That was HOA code for "we don't like it. So we're going to punish you." I crossed my arms and told him I'm not paying this fine. Not a cent. And if you think my fog machine is hurting the neighborhood, maybe you should ask the 20 kids over there laughing their heads off if they agree. The kids actually cheered when I said that. Their parents smirked too, though they stayed quiet. I could see the board members turning red. They weren't used to being called out publicly, especially in front of the very people they claimed to protect. By the next morning, I had another notice in the mail. This one wasn't just a fine. It was a threat. It said that if I refused to pay, the HOA had the authority to put a lien on my property. A lien. Over fake skeletons and some spooky sound effects. That's when I knew this wasn't going to be a quick fight. They weren't backing down, and neither was I. Instead of tearing down my decorations, I doubled down. I spent the next 2 nights adding even more details, stringing up glowing ghosts from the trees, planting fake hands that looked like they were clawing out of the ground, and building a scarecrow that looked so real it made my neighbor jump out of his skin when he walked past. People kept stopping by to admire the setup. One family even told me they'd heard about my house from friends across town and came just to see it. My decorations weren't just neighborhood fun anymore. They were becoming a local attraction. The HOA hated it. They started sending patrols around the block, snapping pictures of my yard like they were gathering evidence for a court case. I waved at them every time. It drove them crazy. But the real twist came when I realized that the more they tried to shut me down, the more support I was gaining. My neighbors started talking about it in group chats. Some even sending me messages like, "Don't let them bully you, and we've got your back." It wasn't just neighbors either. One evening, a reporter from the local paper showed up at my door. She said she'd heard about the HOA drama and wanted to write a feature about it. I hesitated at first. I wasn't sure how much I wanted my name out there. But then I thought about it. If the HOA wanted to drag me through the mud, why not flip the script? So I agreed. She walked through my haunted yard, snapping pictures and jotting down notes while I explained how the HOA fined me for decorations that everyone else loved. I made sure to point out the families who were visiting and the smiles on the kids' faces. The story ran 2 days later with the headline, "HOA finds resident over Halloween display loved by the community." The HOA board lost their minds. They sent out a community-wide email claiming my decorations violated safety regulations, trying to spin the narrative in their favor. But the damage was done. People weren't buying it. If anything, the article just brought more visitors to my house, and Halloween night hadn't even arrived yet. By the time Halloween night rolled around, my yard looked like something straight out of a horror movie set. Fog machines hissed across the lawn. Red and green spotlights cast eerie shadows against the house. And my newest creation, a massive animatronic Grim Reaper, stood guard by the porch, his scythe glowing in the dark. Cars lined up down the block. Parents guided their kids through the maze of tombstones I'd built. And teenagers dared each other to step closer to the scarecrow that was rigged to move when they weren't looking. Laughter, screams, and the sound of rattling chains filled the air. It was perfect, but I knew the HOA wouldn't let the night pass without trying something. And sure enough, just after sunset, I saw Peterson and 2 other board members storming up the sidewalk. This time, they weren't carrying clipboards, they had a police officer with them. The crowd went quiet for a moment as the officer stepped forward. He looked around at the decorations, the families, the smiling kids holding candy bags. Then he turned to me and asked, "Sir, are you the homeowner?" "I am," I said calmly. "And I assume you're here because of them?" I gestured toward the HOA board. Peterson immediately jumped in. "Officer, this display is a violation of our community safety guidelines." It's attracting too much traffic, blocking driveways, and creating a nuisance. We demand it be shut down immediately." The officer listened, nodded, then turned back to me. "Do you have a permit for this?" I shook my head. "No permit required. It's private property, and every decoration you see is safe and secured. Fire hazards? None. Structural risks? None. It's just Halloween fun." The only complaint comes from them. The officer took a long look at the scene, again kids laughing, parents chatting, neighbors enjoying themselves, and then he lowered his voice so only I and the board could hear. "I don't see a problem here. In fact, I've seen far worse setups without anyone batting an eye. Unless there's a city ordinance against Halloween decorations. I can't shut this down." The HOA board member's jaws practically hit the floor. Peterson sputtered. "But this is clearly against the community standards. The bylaws say." The officer cut him off. "Your bylaws aren't city law. If you have a civil issue, take it to civil court. But as far as public safety goes, everything looks fine." The crowd actually cheered. Some of the kids even started chanting, "Let it stay. Let it stay." And that was the moment I realized the HOA had officially lost control of the situation. Humiliated. The board members stomped off, but not before Peterson hissed at me. This isn't over. But the truth was, it was over. Because later that night, something happened that completely flipped the script as the last trick-or-treaters were leaving. The local reporter who had covered my story showed up again. When I found out my house was officially entered into the city's Halloween contest, I laughed out loud. It wasn't just some small neighborhood competition. It was a citywide event with dozens of entries, sponsors, and even a cash prize. The best part? The entire thing was open to public voting. The HOA board went ballistic when they heard. I started getting snide notes on my porch, warning me that if I didn't remove the decorations, they'd take legal action. Peterson even called one evening, trying to intimidate me. "You think this is funny? You're embarrassing the community. If you go through with this, we'll make sure you regret it," I calmly told him. "You've already fined me, called the police, and dragged my name through the mud. What else do you have left? The city's behind me now, and so are the neighbors." And I was right. Neighbors who'd been hesitant to get involved before started speaking up. They offered to help me improve the display. One family donated string lights, another brought hay bales for the yard. And even some of the teens volunteered to act as live monsters for Halloween night. My little haunted house was becoming a community project, but the HOA didn't give up. On the night before the contest, judges were scheduled to visit. I caught Peterson and another board member sneaking around my yard with flashlights. I stepped outside with my phone recording, and they froze like deer in headlights. "What are you doing on my property?" I asked, my voice sharp-top. Peterson tried to bluff. "We were inspecting for safety violations, without notice." At midnight. With no authority, I held my phone steady. "This is trespassing. Unless you want me to call the police, I suggest you leave right now." They left. But the next morning, I discovered they'd cut the extension cord to my fog machine and tried to knock over some of the props. I quickly fixed everything, but the sabotage only made me more determined when the judges arrived that evening. The house was in full spooky glory, fog rolling, lights flashing, animatronics moving, and neighborhood kids screaming with delight. The judges were grinning ear to ear, taking photos and notes. I could see Peterson lurking at the edge of the crowd, fuming. A few days later, the results were announced. Not only did I win Scariest House in the city, but I also received the award for Best Community Involvement, because so many neighbors had pitched in. The local news covered the story, and my house became a seasonal landmark. The HOA? They were silent, completely humiliated. Their attempt to find me had backfired so badly that people were now questioning their leadership altogether. I overheard neighbors whispering about how the board was out of control, and petitions started circulating to have Peterson removed. But the final blow came when the mayor himself showed up at my door with a certificate. He shook my hand and said, "Thank you for bringing joy to this community. We need more of this, not less." The HOA wanted to make an example of me. Instead, I became the example of why their power trip had to end. The week after Halloween should have been a time of rest, a time to finally pull down the fake cobwebs, box up the animatronics, and sweep away the pumpkin seeds that had scattered across my porch. But instead, my house had become something of a landmark. Cars continued to stop by just to take photos. People left notes of encouragement in my mailbox, and kids begged their parents to let them drive past one more time to see the scariest house in the city. The HOA, however, had not softened. If anything, they had grown more hostile, more desperate to make an example out of me. Their fines doubled overnight. Notices piled up on my porch, taped to my door, shoved into my mailbox. The wording was nastier now, more personal. One morning, came out to find a letter taped right to my front window. "Your behavior is disgraceful. You've humiliated this community. You may have the town fooled, but you don't fool us. You will pay." It was signed not by one person, but by the entire HOA board. I stood there for a long moment, the paper trembling in my hand, my stomach twisting. They weren't just fining me anymore. They were making this personal. But what they didn't realize was that they had already lost that very week. The local paper ran a feature story on me. Man turns HOA battle into Halloween victory. The journalist interviewed kids, parents, even a few elderly residents who all said the same thing: Halloween hadn't been this alive in years. And the HOA. They came across as petty, joyless villains in every quote. The city council invited me to a community meeting to talk about the event. When I walked into the hall, applause erupted. People stood and clapped as though I'd just delivered a speech. But I hadn't said a word yet. The mayor even pulled me aside afterward and said, "You've brought this city together in a way I haven't seen in years. Don't back down." The more support I received, the angrier the HOA became. They sent threats of lawsuits, threats of property liens. They demanded I remove every last decoration by midnight. Even though Halloween was already over, and then came the twist I never expected. One night, as I was sitting on my porch, sipping coffee and staring at the fading skeletons still tied to my oak tree, a car pulled up. Out stepped an older man with graying hair, wearing a neatly pressed suit. He introduced himself quietly. "I used to be HOA president years ago," he said. Before these current clowns took over, he handed me a thick folder. "In here, you'll find records. Financial mismanagement, misuse of funds, illegal fees." They'd been bleeding this neighborhood dry for years. My jaw dropped as I flipped through the documents. Everything was there: proof, receipts, checks written for personal vacations, cash taken from community accounts. "Why are you giving this to me?" I asked. "Because," he said, glancing around as though someone might be listening, "they picked the wrong person to bully. And because I believe you'll do something about it." The next morning, I took the file straight to the local news. The fallout was immediate. The HOA board was investigated, their shady dealings exposed for the whole town to see. Fines were dropped, lawsuits evaporated, and the board was dissolved within weeks. And me. The same house that had nearly cost me thousands in fines was now a city treasure. People asked if I'd turn it into an annual haunted attraction. The mayor even joked about officially renaming my street Spooky Lane. When I finally packed away the last of my decorations, I stood on my lawn,